let me please bring up our panel to discuss this. I'm delighted to welcome Klaus Kompas, who is Vice President for Vehicle Safety at the BMW Group. Klaus, a very warm welcome. I suggest you go to the end there. Gwen Kozigu, who is Director for Industrial Transformation and Advanced Value Chains in, oh, you moved, in DG GROW in the European Commission. I saw you there earlier, and there you popped up. Gwen, please take a seat. Richard Schramm, Technical Manager at the European New Car Assessment Programme, Euro NCAP. A warm welcome to you, Richard. Sigrid de Vries, Secretary General of CLEPA, the European Association of Automotive Suppliers. Lovely to see you, Sigrid. And John Dawson, he's already been mentioned, founding chairman of, I realise I should have asked you earlier, is it IRAP or IRAP? IRAP, the International Road Assessment Programme. A very warm welcome to you all. Right, let's jump straight in. We don't have long, lots to talk about. Just in terms of the extent to which this will provide in the long term all the answers to our road safety challenge. We've heard human error is responsible for more than 90% of accidents. Is automation going to eventually deliver what we need? And if it is, what's the challenge that we're going to need to meet, the key challenges to realise that potential? Gwen, let me start with you in terms of how great's the potential and what's the biggest challenges, do you think? You have a, there we are.
You said it, 90% of accidents have got a human origin. The less you put of human origin, the less accidents potentially you have. So the potential is enormous. This being said, we have quite a lot of issues. And actually, we mentioned them in the strategy we have proposed on connected automated mobility. Just to name a few: safety issues, liability issues, cybersecurity issues, over-reliance of the drivers is one of the safety issues. So there are plenty of issues we have to address, but we're determined to go for them because of actually the potential I just mentioned. I mean, it's worth it.
And although Eric said at the beginning it's all quite a long way off, do you think we are addressing those issues as much as we need to now? Does it influence how we're approaching some of these technology questions we were discussing in the last panel?
That's very often a criticism that's made on the EU approach. But we want to address them fast, but safety first. So that's basically our determined choice from the beginning, safety first. We don't want to go and test as some of our partners might do. We don't want the crashes we see in the US because our population might react very differently from the US population. I have that joke sometimes saying, you know, when the smartphone or the mobile phone was invented, American citizens said, wow, I'll be able to use a phone in the street while moving. The European population doesn't it give me brain cancer? So taking into consideration these cultural differences, I think that taking a safety-first approach in the EU is the best way we have not to kill the technology before it's deployed.
Thank you very much. Richard, from your perspective, the key challenges to realise the full potential of automation to deliver on this zero vision?
I think we should acknowledge that there's two levels of automation. There's comfortable automation, which we believe that the car can take over from the normal driving task. But the more important one is the emergency automation, which you already see coming to the market. AEB is automation. It's the car slamming the brakes while you don't at the very last moment. Well, initially you could have done it yourself. So I think that level of automation will piggyback on the fact that taking over the normal driving automation needs a lot of more sensors on the vehicle, a lot more robustness, which will then on that turn improve the quality of the AEB systems that we see in the market. So I think there's a gain not only on the vehicle taking over your driving task, but at the other side, the emergency system that we are demanding today, which rely on 1 or 2 sensors at the maximum, can rely on a lot more sensors and have a better perception of the environment, and therefore have a lot better performance.
And the key challenge to get to that point where you have these multiple sensors doing that?
I think you need the comfortable automation to ensure that these sensors will be coming to the vehicles. It isn't cost effective to do them only for the safety systems. So you need both at the same time. And I think that introduction comes over time, and regulation, of course, needs to allow it to make sure that these more advanced systems can come to the market. Even though now there is a particular situation where one manufacturer has a vehicle ready, but is not allowed to put it on the market and sell it. And I think this is something that we need to overcome, take away the legislative hurdles and allow these systems to come to the market, because OEMs are willing to do this, but for some reason we're stopping this.
So when we talk about an integrated approach, that's another element that we haven't really talked about in our last session. We need to create the right environment to foster this innovation, to support it, and therefore, as you say, enable them to come to market and get that take-up that we'll need. Sigrid, in terms of the potential and the key challenges, how do you see it?
Well, there's obviously great potential. I mean, the 90% was mentioned already a lot of the time. And I think we've seen great advances in road safety due to the seatbelt and the airbag. And this is really the next big thing. So yes, we all need to work together to make it happen. And the general safety regulation is an element and a tool in that. But eCall, for example, helped as well. There are estimates now that by 2025, 70% of all cars on the roads will be connected. So that will be another leap that we're then making jointly to reap the benefits of the new technologies. So yeah, there's still a lot to do. There's a lot of potential. We need to work together. It's very, very complex. Main challenges, apart from technology that is developing fast and also learning fast, self-learning is an important part of that. We need to work on awareness and credibility of these systems so that people have confidence in them. And we need to look at this from a global perspective. We need harmonization of regulatory frameworks, of policy, also of technology use, because there need to go a lot of investments into these technologies, into the systems, into the infrastructure. And if we all do this in different ways, we would be wasting money rather than spending it in a wise way. So that's a key element as well.
Okay, lots to come back on. But John, from your perspective, how do you see the challenge? And do you think, what is the implications for what we're doing now? Because as I say, we are talking about something, increasing and incremental levels of partial automation, but this fully automated world presents challenges of its own. What are the implications now?
Well, this is the John Lennon question, isn't it? Life is what happens to you while you're planning something else. And I think this is perhaps, to me, the most challenging and most difficult part of it all. We've done some work, published some work recently, Roads That Cars Can Read, Volume 3. And that tells us that if we we believe the scenarios, then we might get a 25% reduction in total road trauma when 50% of cars on the road are highly automated. It's a scenario. But coming from the road sector, I'm thinking to myself, well, actually there's an awful lot that can be done in the roads sector as well. And 25% is roughly what, as Matthew and Violetta Bulch indicated, what you can get by just cleaning up the maintenance quality of our main roads. Now, here's a really important thing for everybody to understand, that most road trauma and most travel takes place on round about 10% of the network. Do not think about busy highways. Think about busy single carriageway roads, because that is where the trauma lies, and that is what we've got to tackle. These are 1- and 2-star roads, and we're driving 4- and 5-star cars on them. We're not giving the road authorities the money they need. We're not giving them even the institutional framework where death and serious injury is the top priority, and that has to change.
Thank you very much. Klaus, complete the picture for us in terms of the challenges as you see them and what the implications are for what we're doing now to prepare for that future world. And in terms of timing, the fully automated car that really takes control, what are we talking, 2030?
Well, I don't want to speculate on that one now. First of all, let me make one statement. We talked a lot about the 90%, whether it's 90% or 94% of human errors that cause the accidents. That number is a fact. There's no doubt about it. But we must not neglect the fact that human beings are very well and very, very good in avoiding accidents. And those 90%, we only look at those accidents that occurred because the human being wasn't able to avoid that accident. Now, statistically, we must not make that mistake to just take the rest where the human beings failed and then judge out of that the human being is a very bad actor on the road. As a matter of fact, the human being has a lot of strengths, and we really have to be careful in not neglecting those strengths. The human being also has weaknesses, there's no doubt about it. We get distracted, we get tired. So for me, the optimal combination is an assistance system. A system that can support, that can help the driver when the driver is, for example, distracted or is tired or something like that. With respect to automated driving, the first generations of automated driving, and I really put it in plural, are on number one roads, are on highways, are in congestions. We can do a lot in those situations and can come to high levels of automation very quickly. But this is not where all the fatalities occur. These are situations in a congestion. I'm not talking about the end of the congestions with the truck approaching. I'm talking in the middle of that congestion where you can drive automatically. People rarely get injured or hurt. So in those cases, we allow for automated driving pretty quickly. But I work in vehicle safety since 30 years now, and I'm a great supporter of automated driving because with all the technology, with all the intelligence that we implement into the vehicles in order to increase the ease of driving, we can support the driver in very critical situations, like you mentioned, on rural roads, on curvy roads, where the accidents occur and where the fatalities occur. We can support the driver, and we have assisted driving in this case. And this is the biggest challenge for me, find the right balance of supporting the human being, the well-conscious human being.
And obviously, when we get to the stage where we are fully automated and we have addressed the issue of the infrastructure that we need, so the connectivity questions and all those issues, then you've said enormous potential. You take the human error factor out, we're sort of there in terms of road safety. But what about this transition period when we're going to be in a very mixed environment, some cars having, and I know, Richard, I think you've done some studies that show even on the technologies we've got, they operate to different degrees. They're not all the same. You can have automatic emergency braking in one car and it's different from in another, and so this very mixed environment where some vehicles have got it, some haven't. We don't have, some roads are great, some are not. How are we going to, that sounds to me potentially more dangerous than where we are now. How are we going to manage that transition? John, you raised the point. What are we going to need to do? Because we can't halt the progress. How do we deal with that?
It's really very interesting because this was one of the surprises in the Roads That Cars Can Read 3 was the fact we now have to have new crash types to forecast what's going to happen with automated vehicles on the road, which makes our forecasting of errors and the interaction between vehicle and infrastructure, which we do, even more complicated, which is why we were researching it with ASEA's help in the first place. The first and most important thing to do is to recognize that we have some fantastic technologies and they're coming into the vehicles now. For safety, getting AEB in, for example, is an immediate short-term action. And we have got to constantly modify and learn as we go along. We've got to suck it and see. But when I said we had to clean up things, there's a Swedish guy called Klaus Tingvall you will have come across says, well, the maintenance guys will be the new heroes. Now what that's a reference to is in the roads world, the heroes are the people who do the major motorway projects, for example, the big, heavy, masculine infrastructure, big bridges, they're the heroes. But if we want to run our road system so travel is safe as rail and air, and people like Highways England are targeting that by 2040, not 2050, because if you don't do it on your national network by 2040, you're never going to get there by 2050. You have to have a complete change in management culture and priorities. And the other thing that really sort of rings true to me, which I'll answer in your last question, which you asked me when I was commissioner, is we have got to give the engineers the freedom to move, to prioritize safety, and the freedom to interact with the roads of the cars of the future.
Richard, I'm right in thinking you did these tests, and there are different levels of some of these technologies, and also you did some consumer surveys, I believe, on what motorists understand by this and how far down that road we are. What's the picture we get from that?
The main goal of our publication on what we called automated driving, although it was only assisted driving, was purely to make sure that consumers' expectations are tempered. There is no such thing as automated driving at the moment, not even close.
But they 70% of consumers thought there was, didn't they?
Yeah, there were a lot of them. Even people were thinking that they could read books, they could watch films in the vehicles at the moment, and which is just simply not the case. And what we wanted to do is not compare A and B and state, well, A is wrong and B is good. We really wanted to show, well, all of these systems that you can buy today, even though they are called automation, autopilot, auto steer, whatever the names are, they're only assistance systems, and they will fail. And we showed them, at least we found scenarios, typical scenarios on day-to-day drives where all of the cars failed. And we're not saying this is a bad thing. Again, this is where they are designed how to work. They need to keep you in the loop. And I think that is the main task. Either you're an assisted vehicle and you make sure the driver is in there, or you're automation and you can have the driver do something else. But then you take full responsibility as a car as well. And I think what we wanted to show at our publication, there is no such thing as automation. Not even close.
And the lessons that you've drawn from that, how do they help with this transition? So we will get there eventually. I know, Klaus, you don't want to put a precise date on it. We'll get there eventually. Does that help us to understand how to deal with this period when we have different degrees of automation?
I think so. The people need to be exactly enormously clear on what type of systems they have in the vehicle and what they can do with it, and especially what they should not do with them. I think this is the key message, and also all of the elements that came by and are part of the GSR, which we're also working in Euro NCAP roadmap, are elements of making this clear and able to do this. You need driver monitoring, direct driver monitoring, to be able to tell whether the driver is taking his role when the car is in assisted mode. I think those are the key elements that we need to address.
Sigrid.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, driver awareness and driver education is very important, and not just the first owner or driver of a vehicle. Or it needs to be become part of driver license training. It needs to become part of the mobility of the future in a way, and how we deal with that. And we're not there now, but I think we'll see a lot of change coming there in the next few years. We're now hopefully very quickly bringing all these new technologies that assist drivers into the vehicles and onto the road, and then the next thing will really be to help drivers and consumers use them and make the most of them. I think it's indeed good to realize that humans are very creative and very good at dealing with unforeseen situations. I mean, even the automated cars that you have today, because a lot of them are being tested, and that's okay. You need tests to learn, but these cars themselves don't often cause accidents. So it's not like with the humans causing accidents, but they can often be involved in accidents because they cannot deal with unforeseen situations. Yeah. So that's yet another way of looking at it. And what I also strongly believe, and I mentioned testing already, and we need cross-border testing as well, because the systems being still so very much organized at a national level, we need more deployment of the technology, more pilots to learn more about what is possible and what is not. And you will probably see in the beginning more confined spaces or areas where an automated fleet might be deployed, or more assistance may be allowed. And then in the end, it will gradually evolve and become
but we may have to do it
use.
In those zones.
Yes. Yeah. So we need to indeed stay. I'm not saying we're hyping today. I don't believe that's the case. But we definitely need to stay away from a hype.
Yeah. Gwen, I was trying to think of, I know you work with a number of industries, and I can't think of another industry where the benefits at the end are so enormous, but the potential risks during the transition phase, because of this mixed environment, are so great. I mean, you may say, oh yes, no, this is happening in a lot of areas. I can't think. Are there lessons we can learn from other areas facing similar challenge, or is this unique? And if it is, how are we going to take full advantage of all this innovation and deal with this transition?
Actually, the whole industry is actually in a moving, be it for climate or being for connectivity, automotivity, and actually a lot of sectors are facing huge challenges. But
huge disruption, but of this kind where there's a danger.
If you let me finish my sentence.
Sorry.
This is quite special, I would say, because there's a huge human factor that comes into play. That's what makes it very, very specific. Not only from the emotional point of view of the vehicle, the car towards our citizens, but also the fact that there's a big interaction between human attitude and what the product, in that case the vehicle, and the infrastructure around it interact. So I think that's what makes it very specific. And there, I think there are various elements we have to play to secure in order for the transition to function. I would say the first thing is predictability. So it's know that where people are going, but also predictability of the vehicle for other vehicles. When you have that sort of I would say coexistence between conventional vehicles and connected automated vehicles, the predictability of the behavior of the latter is essential. The second element I would say is basically the interaction between those between the vehicle, the driver, and the infrastructure, the other drivers as well. So that's also, by the way, those two priorities, predictability and interaction, are the core elements of them are already, I would say, well identified and covered in the safety measures we are proposing, Commission has been proposing. I would add another one. I mentioned already earlier on the risk of over-reliance of the driver. I think the understanding of the driver, and you were mentioning it beforehand as well, but the capacity of the vehicle is also essential. So there will be a need for a lot of information action so that there's no overconfidence in what the vehicle can do or can do for the driver itself.
And Klaus, from a vehicle manufacturer's perspective, how, in terms of what you're doing now and the work you're doing for the future, how are you addressing these issues of this transition phase and making sure, we talked about that over-reliance factor and others, what can you do from a technological point of view to address some of these issues so that what we're doing now helps drivers prepare for that future but doesn't mislead them into thinking the future's already here, as it were?
Well, the first thing, we don't call our system autopilot. I mean, yeah. we are laughing about that, but it is very, very important to not let the driver think that the car can do more than it actually can do. Actually, as a matter of fact, there are two transition processes. One is the technological one, and I start with that one, and the second is the one on the human being. The technological transition, what we actually do is we implement systems evolutionary. So one example for the automated driving, if there is a congestion and there is an accident in the front of the congestion, you need to build an emergency corridor. As a matter of fact, this means that our automated vehicles have to change their lane centering strategy. What we actually started a couple of weeks ago, a couple of months ago, is we have an emergency corridor app. So we received the information from the police in Germany, and I hopefully this is going to be spread out in Europe. We received the information. Right now we are giving an information to the driver that the driver has to build an emergency corridor, because this is not always the case. If it's just a normal congestion because of too many vehicles, you don't necessarily have to do that. But if there's an accident, you should do that. So firsthand, we use it as an information. And just in the second step, we use this information and this intelligence, this piece of intelligence, in order to change the lane centering strategy for higher degrees of automation. That is just one example for the transition, for the technological transition we need to make. But there is another one, and that is people need to get used to the systems. And if we just as long as we are below level 5, where you simply, the car can drive on its own. But I think you raised that question. That is still a very long time to go in all the situations.
Yeah.
But as long as we are not there, we need the driver anyways. We need the driver to come back to take over control. And the driver needs to get used to what his abilities and his responsibilities are, and what the capabilities and also the limits of the the technical system is. Many years ago, when we started the first ACC system, we had these systems had the issue that if an obstacle, another car, for instance, occurred, and by the time that my car recognized that car first time, it was stationary at that time, it simply ignored this vehicle. That all the first generations of ACC worked that way. Actually, what we actually did is we tested with test drivers. We let test drivers drive those cars, and we identified whether drivers would get used to it and would react properly. The first time that drivers were involved in that experience, they were very surprised. They were just shocked, but they reacted. Second time, they could expect what happened, and after 3 or 4 times they knew where the system limits, and it's not a failure in this case, it really is a system limit, and they reacted with that. And accident research today shows there was no problem. People got used to it. Now, with the more complex the situations become, the more difficult it is to get used to it. So we need to give the consumers a little bit more of time to get used to the new systems.
Which brings us back to Lauriane's idea from the last session when she said the old way where you took your driving test when you were 18, you passed and that was it, you could drive. She said, no, we're going to need to go to a more of a lifelong learning process, because as new technologies come on stream, that interaction will change, and somehow we have to find a way to keep people on that learning curve. But we'll come back on that. And I want to come back to this question we talked about in the last session about the regulation, the environment that fosters the innovation, whether we haven't talked yet really about, we've talked about road infrastructure in the last session and how roads are much poorer in some parts of Europe than others, but the ability to read signs, to read the road, and what that's going to mean, Gwen, and I'd like to come to you on that point about what that's going to mean in terms of what Europe needs to do to enable these cars to operate right across Europe. But does anybody have a question or comment to our panel before I do that? Okay, so Gwen, just coming back on that point, we talked and we had a question in the first one about, there's too much regulatory fragmentation, we need to bring this together. How crucial is this going to be? And you raised issues at the beginning, liability issues and so on. How do you see the challenge? And would you agree with those who say we're going to need much more harmonized regulation if this is going to work as we move closer and closer to the automated world?
First, I have the privilege of being in charge of the vehicles. So I must admit that the legislation, as far as the vehicles themselves are concerned, is fully harmonized. So that I'm in a privileged position compared to Matthew, for example, who is suffering much more than I am about divergence. But the beauty of connected automated driving is that it needs both. So it will not be enough now to have harmonization of the vehicles, the regulatory framework for the vehicles only, because there is interaction with infrastructure and so on and so on. If you take intelligent speed assistance, for example, which we actually are proposing in the GSR, or lane keeping assistance, you need a
Let's stay with lane keeping.
Lane keeping, sorry. You basically need a good infrastructure in the sense that you need good signalization, you need good markings. And if you don't have them, you have a problem. On top of that, they might differ from a member state to another one. Matthew might give you another information. From what I understand, there is a certain reluctance by member states to harmonize in that field. Despite our efforts to bring convergence. But there will be a need for convergence. If you look at connectivity, for example, you can't imagine the system being completely different from one member state to the other. You can't imagine the vehicle stopping at the border. Especially, as far as I'm concerned, for an official who's been working on the internal market for more than 30 years, that would be a pity.
That's an understatement.
There will be a need for member states to realize that if they also want this industry to remain competitive, if they want citizens to benefit from the same benefits as they do now with conventional vehicles, with vehicles that are actually not connected and automated, they will need to make efforts. there will be a citizens' demand there. Not only there will be an industry demand, and there will be a citizens' demand. So we will continue pushing as far as the Commission is concerned, and I think we can reasonably be optimistic on the fact that reason will prevail at the end.
Question being, when is at the end?
Well,
yeah, it's always slower than we would wish in the EU.
Yeah.
We have a little bit of a problem because there are about 1,000 road authorities. And we published a paper early on where we said that edge line marking could be really helpful. It's helpful for the aging driving population, and it's helpful for lane keeping and clear delineation of the road surface edge. And a German authority said, "Gosh, I've just said we can do away with all that to save money, and now I'm bringing it back again because I had no idea that the German motor industry would actually benefit from having that clear expression." What we have to do, I think, is start to get rid of the differences that are utterly unnecessary. For example, differences in Vienna Convention signs, and Matthew indicated that might actually be happening. This is almost a zero-cost option because we're talking about a period of decades, and it just means that we decide we're going to replace the signs which all look the same and they have the same color and font. And what does that do? That reduces the cost and ghost readings from the technology. The classic one is the 150 by 150. Why don't we have 150 millimeter wide lines with 150 something lux retro reflectivity? Because we can do that. But the real issue is the quality assurance. We will require for the first time that roads are managed like rail and air systems. It is unrealistic to think 90% of the roads that will happen on, but the 10% of main roads where most of the travel and most of the death can be managed properly, and we need to put the financial and institutional arrangements in place to do that. Not just for the benefit of the automated vehicles, but for the benefit of the road users now. I've got rates of return of something like 4.4 benefit cost ratios when we start doing this systematically. They are the highest return in the transport program. Why aren't we doing it anyway?
But okay, not an economic cost if you say now and we will change, but I think a cultural, a political cost, if you like, that Gwen was pointing to, that everyone says, well, okay, we'll use my sign as the standard. Let's use, whichever country it is. So these things are always much more difficult to do, even when there is an economic cost. But Sigrid, how important is this going to be in terms of, and we talked there about road markings and the big difference, road signs, etc. And how do you see the way to resolve this?
Yeah, it is important, but I don't think we should we shouldn't make too much of a problem out of it. I think a lot of is happening, and with digital maps is one thing. It's incredibly important, but it is happening, and I think, one of you mentioned before that this is as much about safety as also about industrial policy in a way, because it's such a big leap, and the technology is going to be so important, and as a society, we can have so many benefits. So there was some study and some data collected already also in the framework of GEAR 2030, which is not a very popular subject with many of us here, but some of the data collected was very good. So a lot of that was about environmental issues, but it also looked very much and very closely at connected and automated driving and all the benefits that would bring for safety, but also for economic growth, for innovation, for basically for doing Europe a lot of good. And one of the conclusions there was that yes, it would be great if all of that could be harmonized and if we could have it very quickly, but it wasn't that much of a huge problem. And as my neighbor here said, it would also benefit manual driving. If you have well-maintained roads, if you have clear road signs, if you have a unified system that is recognizable for everyone wherever you go, that is benefiting all of us, whether it's
so we don't have to say, oh, it's the brave new world out there, we need to do it. It benefits, there are immediate benefits as well.
Yes, but I do think harmonization and having a unified legal framework and policy framework is terribly important, and it brings us back to the need to cooperate to work together to get to this integrated approach. Indeed, we also see it in the Commission, the benefit of just having to regulate vehicles. Congratulations with that. But indeed, you need to work now together with DG Move, with DG Connect, with DG Research, and many others. And I think the Commission have made a lot of progress there. But a lot more can be done. And then we're not even talking about the international level. And again, I commend the Commission for pushing also Geneva. But I also see that in Geneva there is a new wind, in a way, blowing, that they also bring together in jargon WP29 and WP1 and all kinds of conventions. They are looked at in a more integrated way. So I think a lot of good progress is being made. Yeah, it could go quicker, we need to agree, but there's a new spirit, a new SP, and I think that's really great.
When you wanted to respond?
Yeah, I agree with you, and perhaps one comment is that wouldn't that be a bit ironical, having succeeded creating modifying a working group in UNECE for WP29, which is now specifically dedicated to connected automated vehicles, and we convinced Chinese, Japanese, even Americans to go for it, and member states would not do the small efforts necessary on the infrastructure, the signalization.
Klaus, from your perspective, this question of harmonization, and we're talking here about industrial policy, we're talking about world leadership. From your perspective as a vehicle manufacturer, how important is it going to be to address these issues if you are to remain at the cutting edge of this and to play that world leadership role that EU industrial policy, the new revised industrial policy strategy is aimed at? How important is it going to be to address this harmonization issue?
It is extremely important. I mean, this is technology that is not just implementing some steel plates or some new frame components. This is technology that really costs a lot of money and especially costs a lot of brain intelligence. And if we have different directions to go to in the United States, in Asia, and in Europe, we will not be able to manage that. It even goes further than that. If we look at the connectivity issue, we are talking about the same frequencies that are being used in different ways. Perhaps not, and I hope not. But right now we don't have a globally harmonized technology that we could agree upon, and that really makes the realization of solutions extremely difficult. So harmonization for me is the key.
Richard?
Well, from an NCAP perspective, we're trying to harmonize as well. There's crash testing in the past, which will be nearly impossible to harmonize. But certainly on the active safety side and automated driving, we are speaking a lot more than what we did in the past. Speaking to the US, speaking to Japan, Korea, all of the other countries to make sure that technology is developed here. And I think we have a unique possibility in Europe where, from NCAP side, we have extremely good cooperation with both CLEPA and ASEA, where we develop together on the basis of feasibility of technology and what technology level is expected to be at a certain point in time, cost effectively. I think that's unique in the world, where we are leading as Europe and where the rest of the world is following and trying to keep up. But I think it's also our role to keep speaking to the others, to get their ideas, and to make sure that what we do here is also beneficial for the other areas.
Gwen, can I come back? We're talking here about, when we talked about integration, the point was made earlier about it needs to be across different levels of governance and so on. And when we talk about infrastructure, we are talking about very big investments, physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure, to realize all of this. What do you think we need to do, and do we have enough coherence at the moment in terms of the approach to addressing that investment challenge, attracting the investment and making sure, I mean, we talked in the last panel about it's better in some parts of Europe than others, but we were talking then about focus on road safety more broadly. The investment challenge, we're talking about huge sums of money. Mm-hmm. How are we going to rise to that challenge? And how are we going to make sure, again, that all different levels of governance play their part?
Well, first, I mean, there are means to invest anyway. There are possibilities at European level to support that deployment as well, and we're ready to examine what are the needs as well. It's true that the situation in different member states is not the same, but perhaps one element in that debate is actually, which is potentially a difference between connectivity automation on one hand and electric vehicles on the other, is that there are private actors that can actually use the connectivity automation factor to sell services. So there is also a business case there for deployment of infrastructure, which is more obvious or more I would say more promising than for electrification. So it's not all public money.
No, and as you say, it is easier to leverage the private investment because there is a business case for doing so. But in terms of this infrastructure question and who's going to pay and how we're going to get there, John, how do you see that challenge?
Well, I think it's in two parts. The first is, and I think Violeta Bulc put a finger on it, how come safety has been overlooked for so long? Because what we find to be true is that the economic returns are higher than anything else in the transport budget. So why, first of all, are we not packaging and investing in the highest returns, reductions in health service costs, social care costs, insurance costs, and all the rest of it. So the first argument, which I hope the Commissioner is beginning to help us with, is to get safety its rational business case priority and package those road safety investments. And that's a huge, huge advance if we can just achieve that. The second thing is I'm noticing in the road sector in particular that there is a growing user pay kind of movement. We see it with the toll roads, for example. And my experience is that the toll road operators don't want to kill you even more than the road authorities who are so strapped for cash, they will tell you they spend all our money we spend on telling you why we can't do what you want to do when people complain. So in the UK, for example, there's been a new change that the major road network, which is 4 times riskier than the national road network, is now going to be funded by direct road tax payment going back 100 years to how it was. The central government said, I'm going to fund a Safer Roads Fund for the 50 most dangerous roads. Let's attack them. And here's £100 million, 125 million euros or whatever. Let's treat this as a safety investment. So I think, we're on the right way, but we need to manage, these bright bubbles and bring them into a coherent movement towards 2030 if we're going to go towards Vision Zero.
Yeah, just to add that indeed it's very true that we're now focusing our discussion today very much on safety, on the safety aspects, which is of course a very important one. But the whole story around connected and automated driving and is much broader than that. Indeed, it will help bring electric vehicles on the road because you know where you can go to charge and you don't have to wait very, very long in line, just to give you an example. And business models and business cases of mobility services, all of the shared mobility, all of the different modes and how you combine your transport going from A to B using different kinds of transport, that's all part of connected and automated mobility. And I'm deliberately not saying connected and automated driving because it is about connected and automated mobility, and this is much broader. And indeed, I think investment incentives will come in from other areas, and then other challenges and problems too. We could have a hugely interesting debate about access to data here this afternoon, but I won't
if we go down that road, we'll never get out. But yes, I mean, an issue that has to be discussed. We talked, Klaus, in the last session about the interaction between technologies, and we were focusing there very much there on safety technologies per se. But a point being made here about when we're talking about connectivity and automation, there are multiple benefits from one technology. For you, in terms of realizing those synergies, making those connections, how much now is the safety discussion and the work you're doing on safety integrated into that broader question and looking at all these technologies working together? Do we have enough joined up thinking there as well?
Well, first of all, Richard mentioned in the beginning we have to separate two levels. One is the two levels of automation. One is the more comfortable or comfort-oriented level, and the other one is the safety level. Automatic emergency braking is already a safety automation. In order to have automatic emergency braking systems, we need to have the technology on board. Now, this technology really, we need to get some kind of a selling point for people to be interested in those technologies. And the adaptive cruise control is something that the customer understands, the customer wants to have, and what comes with it is that we have the radars on board to allow for automatic emergency braking, for just as one example. So the system have a strong interconnection, but nevertheless, we as a car manufacturer, we have to develop and we have to design our vehicles according to the existing infrastructure, for example. So we can only make the system as good as the roads are today. And we certainly do that. We can only make an automation system as good as it can be without connection and connectivity. If we integrate connectivity, if we integrate or improve the quality of the infrastructure, we can make the systems more reliable, more robust, and thus safer. So there is a clear interdependence, but we now have to accept the situation as is, and we can only argue for, well, improve the infrastructure, and we can get better as well.
Yeah. So the two things, if they don't, it's the same as when we have the electromobility debate, isn't it? That you have to do the two things in tandem because you won't get the take-up of electromobility without the charging point. So your argument, we really have to, you as manufacturers can only respond, customers won't ask for it or use it, except, as you say, if you're selling it to them on another grounds, as it were. So you can be saying this will make your life not just safer, and although people say, of course I will invest in safety features, will they? If you say it'll make your driving more fun or more pleasant, perhaps more likely. We come back all the time to humans, their interaction with this technology. It was a very striking theme from our first session, was the way we behave, and Malin was making the point about what we know about how people interact with technologies and how they respond in different situations. Be interested to get your thoughts on that as we touched on it, but also and come back to Lauriane's point about lifelong learning to enable them to adapt. But before I do that, any last questions or points? I'll give priority to those who haven't had the floor, and if I can squeeze you in, I will. Thank you, sir. Please introduce yourself and please be brief. Hang on, we seem to have a mic problem. No, now we can.
Okay. Who is guarantee me the working of all the nice assistance systems with the sensors and the modules, etc., of a car 5 years old, who has been sold several times, who has been involved in some minor accidents, who had a broken windscreen that has been replaced, etc. So who is guarantee the during the lifetime the working of all these systems?
You mean as it becomes more and more complex, that question becomes harder and harder to answer? There was one on this side. Yes, please. Thanks.
Well, thank you to the panel. It's very technical and very interesting. I'm learning a lot. But I would like to come back to the comparison that Violetta Bulc was making earlier this afternoon with the air industry. And one point that has not been addressed this afternoon is the driver education. If you look at the plane, it's not one driver, there are still two. Okay. If you look at the education program they have, and you compare that to the driving education program that we have in Europe, it's far more complex, far more complete. In Europe, there is no harmonization. As these people are telling us that you need harmonization on technology, it is so obvious. But we are so stupid in Europe that we not even have a single common program to educate drivers. Where are we on that topic? Because I think it's still the most important element in road safety.
Thank you very much indeed. Any others? Yeah.
Jack Kreuzinger, Toyota Motor Europe. I think I would like to emphasize something that Klaus and Richard have already talked about. I think it wasn't so clear so far. The question for this topic on the debate is related to automated driving, and I think we all heard many times, and I deeply believe in it, full automated driving is way down the road. It will be easily 10, 15, if not 20 years away. However, up to that point, we will benefit, and the society will benefit from an increasing suite of sensors, actuators, technology, equipment, and that we will already implement now. Yeah. And we are now paving the road for implementation of that. And I think that this would be a huge benefit way earlier than we see any benefit, for example, to growth, which I think is the real motivation for automated driving then.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I saw a couple of hands over here. I know I'm going to try to squeeze you in if I can. Thank you, sir.
Carsten Karcher from the European Asphalt Pavement Association. I have a question to Klaus. You spoke about that better road infrastructure would enable you to have better safety systems on the cars. So my question is, how could this road infrastructure of the future, or right now, should look like that you could implement those systems?
Thank you very much indeed. And if it's a very quick one, I'll squeeze you in.
Very, very quick, but sorry, but I guess my ACER colleagues are expecting this one. Going back to the question of the white lines, and this addresses issues of joined-up legislation as well as a realistic legislation that applies to the whole of Europe. Only a few months ago, and my members are still working on it, we were very, very worried about the impact of legislation coming from DG Environment on white lines because of the microplastics discussion. We're in intense discussions now with our tyre colleagues and indeed the asphalt colleagues. We're very worried about this, so we'd like to ensure that we don't have, different legislative pulls in different directions. The question of the relevant legislation, we really would call that when we talk about lane keeping assistance, that it is relevant and applies at a specific level, because we don't want to raise the bar too high so that it doesn't apply to other roads. And very, very quickly, please let's not be too technology prescriptive. Not all countries use white lines. Some countries use road studs very, very successfully. We have a big push from our northern colleagues about winter conditions.
Very quick, this is getting longer. I take your point. Klaus, a very specific question to you. What does that road infrastructure that you need look like?
Well, just simple things that we already talked about. Clear lane markings help us. There's no doubt about that. We had a strong debate with Euro NCAP, and Euro NCAP was about or is now testing road edge test scenarios. And I think, Richard, you can really share my point that it is very, very difficult to define what is a good road edge or easily to detect road edge and whatnot. So just the simplest things would help us. Clear road markings, clear signs, signs that are not too old and get kind of invisible for the camera systems and things like that.
Richard, did you want to add something?
Well, I think Klaus is right. We are depending ourselves on current infrastructure. So we were looking at road edges because accidents happen on a lot of roads where there's no lines at all. And we cannot overnight paint them everywhere. So we have to live with the infrastructure we have today. I do see a lot of potential of current cars or automated cars on being the sensor for the road authorities, telling, well, hey, at this point in time, at this location, lines are getting bad, so update it. So there's a lot of the connectivities in that sense where road authorities, car manufacturers, and everybody else can work together to generate this optimal road infrastructure combined with the technology and the vehicles to make sure things are going correctly.
Anybody else want to come in on that point? No. On the point about the guarantees, I'm not sure whether you meant it from a legal perspective, who can guarantee it, or more from a very practical perspective. More from a practical perspective, as we have these increasingly complex vehicles. Sigrid.
Yeah, well, I don't want to preempt anything Winol wants to say, perhaps about about testing, regular testing of vehicles already on the road, but I mean, as Klippa, as suppliers of automotive systems and components, we also serve the aftermarket, of course. So the updating of systems is really also very important for us, and it's an issue. I wouldn't yet say it's a concern, but we expect that, again, by 2025, about 30% of all repairs and maintenance operations will be about software, about updates of systems. And so for us, for example, I come back to the access to data discussion. It's very important that we have the relevant data and that we can do that. But I know that the testing institutes are already breaking their heads over this issue, how they make sure that when they test vehicles for periodical testing, that they also include all of this. And of course, the regulator will have a look at that too. So yes, that's an important issue. It can be done. I mean, you can update your phone every other week, if you like. Vehicles are already updated, some at least today, and it will increasingly happen. It needs to be more transparent, but of course, yeah, with technology developing, that is very important. But I think it's a responsibility that all actors in this field recognize they have, and it's a joint responsibility too, because nobody wants to put vehicles on the road, not component manufacturers or vehicle manufacturers or anybody else, that vehicles that are not safe. So safety is key and comes before everything else. And that goes from cybersecurity to updating to making sure that we can all rely on the technology when needed.
When and then John.
Yeah, I mean, there are various things. As far as vehicles to be put on the market are concerned, we're adapting type approval. But the question was more over the lifetime.
Yes.
I would remind first that there are regular checks being said. Second thing, we more and more in the type approval legislation, as Sigrid was saying, actually introduced this real life on-road checks. And I'll just make a comment. Beyond those measures which we are developing, we don't lack imagination. Be reassured. And I'll give you an example in another sector. You have electric networks in factories. In certain particularly sensitive factories where you can't allow yourself to have an interruption of the current, it's doubled. In nuclear power plants, it's tripled. Redundancy can be a source of imagination where necessary. And the more general reflection, because that's also a challenge we're confronted, as a regulator, I'm confronted with, and we are confronted with, is artificial intelligence, for example. Today, you test a product before you put it on the market, and it reacts in a certain way. So you test basically the characteristics of the products before it's put on the market. When more and more artificial intelligence being incorporated in products, they will behave completely differently over a lifetime, just by learning. And that's also something we will have to deal with from a regulator's point of view. Yeah. And there are various options. We can actually ask for the software to be available. So, but we don't lack imagination. Don't worry too much. We are conscious of it, and we are certainly not neglecting those aspects.
Thank you. Quick one, if you would, Klaus, because we need to try and draw some conclusions in a moment.
Okay. So, I mean, the question of PTIs, of regular inspection, is an extremely difficult and important one. We are working on that very intensively. It comes back to the point and to the fact that we need to find a way to trust simulation, because I don't think that we will be able to test each and every situation. We have to find a way to tell about the quality of a simulation. Now, with artificial intelligence, this is the extreme, and I have a clear statement in that one. Artificial intelligence can learn in real life, but before the system changes its behavior, the change of the behavior of the system must be done from the plant, from the car manufacturer itself, and not vehicle by vehicle.
Thank you.
Yeah, perhaps one thing, because I can't resist, each time we speak about regulation, market surveillance. Market surveillance is all very fine when we foresee it, and as far as the Commission is concerned, but we don't have the competence for it. It's member states' responsibility, and frankly, I'm not talking about the automotive sector only. Generally speaking, automotive sector, we have had a demonstration of it in its splendid lack of market surveillance, but I mean, it's a general syndrome. Market surveillance, member states have to put the means into that.
Thank you. We are almost out of time, so I want to ask you the same question as I asked to our last panel. I want to put you in charge for a day. And I'll start with you, John, just go straight down the line. You're a European Commissioner with some responsibility for road safety. Can be transport, can be grow, can be as you choose. And you can only really do one thing in that day to really make sure that we prepare for and are ready to take full advantage of this automated world, realise that potential but meet the challenges? What's the one thing you're going to do with your day in charge? Same question to all of you.
I think, because I can take sweeping plenipotentiary powers here, can't I? I think that rather like interest rates and other activities have been transferred away from political control because they're too important. I think I would transfer the safety responsibility for infrastructure to an independent regulatory body, and make it much more like a factory. So if you have a known high risk, like a spinning blade without a guard on it, you would be sent to jail in a factory. It is ensure that known high risks are treated, and it is not a financial issue. It is an absolute requirement.
Thank you very much. Sigrid.
If I think big, I think I would create a super department including infrastructure, because we need to have this joined up thinking and an integrated approach. So just transport or even just mobility isn't enough. You need to include energy infrastructure, also telecoms infrastructure. So that's maybe a nice task for the next.
So if you were one of the commissioners, you'd stage a coup and take over the other commissioners' dossier.
Exactly. But to be more practical, I think on my first day in office after the elections have been, I would adopt the general safety regulation, because the delay has been too much. It has to be done. And then I would appoint national Matthew Baldwins so that we have coordinators at a national level. I would keep embracing innovation and then really focus for the next term of the Commission, where you have a bit more time on awareness and education and getting everyone on board and the acceptance done.
Thank you very much. Richard.
On the other side, what I would like to do in that case is similar to what was done with CO2 emissions, is to make a tax regime in multiple countries in Europe to make sure that safety is included there as well. The safer your car, the less taxes you pay, because of the social effects that you are generating by having safer cars, less cost, etc. I think that element is completely undersnowed, not even picked up at the moment, which we need to do quickly.
Thank you, Gwen. It's your turn for the coup.
I start being worried with all these calls from Matthew to reproduct everywhere.
I'm very
everywhere in Europe.
I'm deeply disturbed by the idea.
You've got work in front of you, Matthew. No, I would say that being a commissioner might not be sufficient to satisfy my ambition. I would say two things. The first thing is get things moving, get things done. And we've got two concrete cases that are on the table. GSR, by the way, we are probably going to get a general approach in the council this week. So there's a specific call to the house up the hill. And safety rules, because we show solidarity with colleagues, and it's necessary for that particular file as well. The second thing I would ask for is policy coherence. Policy coherence, of course, like is always called on the Commission services, not to stop working in silos and so on, but don't worry, we are doing that. But policy coherence between the different levels, EU, national, local. We're suffering too much of different approaches now. It's not that the EU Commission official, of course, wants to get everything in terms of responsibility by nature. We want to Europeanize everything. But it's not so much that. It's actually to make sure that we are coherent to better serve the citizens, better serve industry, so that we actually have a framework in which everybody can thrill.
Thank you very much indeed. Klaus, you have the last word.
Well, if there's one thing that I learned from my journeys to Berlin or Brussels or Washington or somewhere else in the world, is there is no such thing like you change something in one day, not even on the political stage. But I mean, hypothetically, I think the most important point for me is from that fantastic speech of Commissioner Bulc. There are three words that I remember the most, and that is collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. And what I heard and what I learned from the process for the GSR, that was, I think, a very, very good start into a much better collaboration than we had in the past. We have to understand the arguments of the other party. We have to bring in our arguments and maybe clarify some overestimations about what a technical system can do, or explain what a human being can do with the physically and scientifically correct tests that we've done, and bring that into the political stage and the political decision-making process. I think this is the key position that I would take in that one day.
So collaboration and coherence, and you have been a marvellous example of that collaboration in action. Ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in thanking our panel very much indeed?